This website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on Revolution.radio. I am your host, Diamond, from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project and Magnetic Reversal News, and this is my lovely co-host and partner, Leah Shaper.
Hello. I actually have my mic on this time.
She's not muted, and she didn't have to restart her computer.
It's a good technology day.
Excellent. So welcome to the show. It's going to be pretty exciting. We are going to be discussing the catastrophic pole shift hypothesis and why it's complete pseudoscience. And we'll do that by talking about the actual science. So we're going to talk about when crocodiles roamed the Arctic, when there were rainforests in Antarctica, and why the tilting of the Earth catastrophically on a short time scale would literally kill everything on the surface.
Yeah.
I mean, would you agree with that?
Yes. Yes. Especially if it happened in very quick fashion. I mean,
like
we would literally be thrown off the planet. There's that problem.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, well, I don't even want to get into that yet. But let's get into some of the timescales of things like, because we're going to be talking about expanding Earth hypothesis here. This could come into play, especially during an event that happened around 35 million years ago. So let's share the screen and let's dive into it, shall we?
Yes.
Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Okay, good. I just have to realize where all the things are I want to look at. Yeah, here's the event in question. So it actually is 34.6 million years ago. The Eocene-Oligocene boundary, a very significant event occurred, a shift in the O18. Oxygen 18 isotope is used as a proxy in all the ice core data to determine ice ages and temperature and things like that. And so there's a massive shift, right? Actually two. So there's this beginning spike here they call the late Eocene event, and then their major shift afterwards downward, or actually it's an increase in oxygen 18. And when I mean downward in temperature.
So we have like 4 proxies for that here in this graph. Am I looking at that correctly? Different parts of the world.
Yeah, these are different studies that they laid over each other. The green line is one, the red line and the blue line, the yellow line. Yes.
What great correspondence there.
Yeah, and so this all corresponds to this graph, which is kind of weird. We're looking at the entire temperature of planet Earth since the Cambrian explosion. And the way they have this graph broken up is the last 400 million years is here, and then we go into this. So this is hundreds of millions, this is tens of millions, this is millions, this is hundreds of thousands, and this is thousands. It's completely confusing.
It's very funny, though, because it really does reflect how much less we know the farther back we go.
Exactly. That's what this is representing, that the clarity of our vision only is very clear like 20,000 years back. Right. And it gets hazy. And then after, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's data resolution, so it makes a lot of sense.
Well, and like the oldest DNA on Earth we just found is 2 million years old. So like the oldest frozen stuff isn't even that old.
Yeah.
But what you can see on this graph is what they call the ice age threshold, this gray line. And somewhere, most people put it at 2.8 million years ago, we entered the ice age. And now they're saying that we are exiting the ice age. But you can see back here during the Eemian, the temperature was much higher than it is today. It's even higher than they predict the temperature to be in 2050 with global warming. So we're not out of the ice age. Not in any respect.
No, we're right on the threshold is really where we're sitting, is what this shows.
So here's the Eocene-Oligocene boundary here. And you can see that there was a rapid drop down. This is the beginning of the end of Antarctica. What do you think I mean by that?
The melting. No, the getting cooler.
Yeah, so back here at this peak here during the Eocene, there is no ice on Antarctica. There is no ice on Antarctica. Let me repeat. And there's no ice in the Arctic. The Arctic is a freshwater ocean.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Yes.
We're going to get to that study in a little bit. But up in the Arctic, there was tropical things going on. There were crocodiles. There were forests. And in Antarctica, there were rainforests.
Mm-hmm.
This is about 50 million years ago. And then by this thing here, the Oligocene-Eocene boundary dropped the temperature just enough here. See, this green goes way down?
Mm-hmm.
That ice began to build in Antarctica and up in the Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time we hit here, it's actually 14 million years is the date they give for Antarctica was the last plant or tree.
Mm-hmm.
So by 14 million years ago, which is kind of here, this next drop down on the graph, Antarctica is exactly the way it is today. Completely covered in an ice sheet. Just penguins and seals and stuff.
And yet the temperature overall was actually a little bit warmer than it is today.
Yeah, in Antarctica, the temperature became the lowest just about 1 million years ago. And it's still the same temperature. Do you know the average daily temperature in Antarctica is minus 75 Fahrenheit? And the mainstream media says it's melting. That is how insane, bogus, and propagandized the media is.
No, but it's worse than that. Like, I was looking at a paper yesterday, which I quickly basically discarded and didn't continue reading because this was a scientific paper that was literally talking about how the ice extent is falling away. It's just garbage data, and this isn't a scientific paper.
Right. The Arctic ice extent is at a 9-year high, and the Arctic ice area also a 9-year high. Anyone can go check it out. You can go to the Climate Analyzer, which is a global warmist run site, and they have to put the real data up. It shows a 9-year high for Arctic ice.
Yeah. I mean, the lack of integrity to actually put that in a paper without even going and looking at the real data, it's disgusting. It's the signal that science is dead.
Yeah, I heard it on the news, so I put it in my paper.
Right. It's like, are you a scientist or are you a propagandist? Pick one.
Well, this is what happened back in the 90s. The National Science Foundation fell apart. It was taken over by the federal government, which is now run by corrupt crony capitalism and pushing this global warming agenda. So the only way you get funded by the National Science Foundation, the only way you can become a PhD for the most part is to toe their line.
Yeah.
Even in the late 90s, you had to be doing a study about global warming or add that in to guarantee success in getting funded.
Yeah, which just goes to show how long the hoax has been going on. I mean, right, you encountered this when you were in grad school, correct? Like you were noticing that the funding was only going towards certain conclusions.
So I refused to do that, and I wrote my own proposals, and guess what? I didn't get funded.
Right.
The only person that funded me, which had to, was the state of Pennsylvania, because they have a program that no matter what you send them, they have to fund you for your master's thesis for at least lodging. So I got my entire funding for my master's research was like $1,500 from Pennsylvania, which covered a bunch of hotel rooms in Altoona. Yeah.
I've been to Altoona. That's a weird place, isn't it?
We used to call it Altoona fish. Yeah. So we've been.
I used to go there for conferences for arts and culture stuff. We would
it's cheap to rent like space there, so that's probably why.
Yeah, and if you have to meet, if you need the whole state to meet for something, it's sort of a good spot in the middle.
So I'm gonna jumpstart the show with an article from the New Scientists with one of my favorite explorers in it, Ernest Shackleton.
Yeah.
Now, this is going to begin the narrative that we are going to unravel here on the catastrophic pole shift hypothesis. All these ideas are coming from early explorers or early scientists that had no prior knowledge of what they were actually looking at. But now, with today's lens and in retrospect, we can see that what they found wasn't as significant as they suggested. In fact, in the case of Ernest Shackleton, he found trees, fossilized trees in Antarctica, which were later found to be 98 million years old.
Right.
So and that people use this data to like prove the Pura-Reese map, which showed Antarctica ice-free recently. When it doesn't show that, it shows South America. And other people use this type of bad information coming from the Arctic and Project Nanook, which we'll get to in a moment. But let me read this. This is amazing. When Ernest Shackleton and his men marched towards the South Pole in December of 1908, they came across something entirely unexpected. After scaling the vast Beardmore Glacier on the edge of the polar plateau, they found seams of coal amid the new snow and ice. They also found impressions of leaves in sandstone boulders nearby, and even fossilized wood from a coniferous tree. The conclusion was extraordinary but inescapable. Antarctica was once warm and forested, conditions that could hardly be more different to the far below freezing midsummer weather that forced Shackleton's team to turn back before reaching the pole. How was this possible? Well, we told you. There was no knowledge of real geology or the geologic time scale. So when people found these things, they used their current knowledge to make up a story, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you now know that they're 90 million year old fossils, does that make it a fantastic story? No, it just shows that a very long time ago, Antarctica was warmer.
Well, it does certainly give the lie to, let's call it the normalcy bias, right? That everything is the same as it always ever was, right? Which is what we still pretend to this day, which is hilarious. While at the same time, we do teach, like in secondary school, that there was an ice age on Earth, but yet we still act like everything is always as it's always been. It's very odd.
Yeah, the law of uniformitarianism has destroyed science, especially geology. It's really the major roadblock for expanding Earth, because the Earth always has to be the same size. The Earth couldn't be smaller. That doesn't fit into our nomenclature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and the other funny thing about it, right, especially when I'm talking about what we're taught in secondary school, we're always given this description of what it was like X number of millions of years ago, and that it was completely different, let's say, and there was an ice age, but there is never any explanation for the change. And we still lack explanations in many cases for what changed the climate, but it's just totally bizarre to have those two things happening at the same time, the uniformitarianism and then acknowledging the change in some other respect without giving an explanation at all.
Yeah, the most glaciated Earth ever since the time period we talked about last week, the Cryogenian and back in before the Cambrian, was 18,000 years ago, people.
Yeah.
and people seem to forget that.
Yeah.
And
it's not that long ago.
Yeah. And then a catastrophe happened shortly thereafter, erasing what was once a great civilization on Earth, the megalithic builders. And mainstream science refuses to acknowledge that as well.
Yes.
Our whole worldview is based on lies. And here are more lies that current pseudoscientists and lawyers use to scare the public, the pants off the public. The work from this famous book, World in Peril, about Maynard White's Project Nanook, which took place from June of 1946 to August of 1948, where they went up into the Arctic and did all these types of studies. And I've already done some podcasts on the chapters in the book covering the catastrophic pole shift or polar wander. And they're all based on the same thing happening with Shackleton. They go up in the Arctic, they find things like, well, they find the Alaskan mucks. So they find these broken bones in these giant deposits, and they say, oh, there was a catastrophe up here, a flood, which there was. But then they find fossils that are tens of millions of years old, not 12,000 years old, and they relate it all in a single story. Because there's tropical plant fossils up in the Arctic, and there's these floods. They claim that the Earth must have tilted, causing the flood, and put the Arctic into the equatorial zone, which allowed it to have these plants. The problem is the mucks are 12,000 years old from the Younger Dryas event, And the fossils are tens of millions of years old. They're not related.
Is there just an issue here of these people not understanding stratigraphy? Like, how do you make that mistake? I don't understand that.
Well, let's dive into the Arctic science first, and then we'll go to the Antarctic.
Yeah.
So there have been hundreds of scientists that have studied this since these accounts that are old. Real scientists, because geology has been flourishing now for decades. And there are hundreds of papers that have come out about the paleoclimate and the geology up in the Arctic, and it's getting very specific. I mean, we've gone over like the platinum data and all the cosmic catastrophe data that is specific to the Younger Dryas boundary. And there's dozens of scientists that worked on that single stratigraphic plane, for goodness sakes. So the amount of information we have is much greater now. Why they're not using that is beyond me. You would have to be either purposefully being disingenuous. That's my, or I don't have another option.
Or it could just be being lazy, right? I mean, there's lots of people that do research and write papers, and they don't thoroughly research what they're doing. They find the information that fits their theory, and then that's what they present.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the tropical forests in the Arctic that they're using. This is one of the cases for the catastrophic tilting of the Earth. Now, the problem with that, using this, is that these tropical forests up in the Arctic are not recent. The forests are early late Devonian, which sounds like gibberish to many people, but that places them 360 million years ago.
Well, and actually, just this paper specifically pushes the incidence of this particular forest that they're finding to the end of the late Devonian into the early Frasnian. Is that how you pronounce that?
Well, it's probably a local unit because in a small time scale, because Devonian is a larger scale, which is broken down into smaller units. Does that make sense?
Oh, I see it now, actually, in the chart in their paper. It's late Devonian, basically, which is the early Frasnian. Same thing.
Yeah, so the early Frasnian is late Devonian, 383.
Yeah. By the way, too, I wanted to mention that I don't know that the paper makes specific mention of this, but the article that mentions this paper doesn't talk about catastrophic tilting. It talks about continental drift, basically.
Yeah, and we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Because 360 million years ago, during Pangea, this is before any of the current oceans that existed. So that's mind-blowing. So what we might be talking about is a smaller Earth.
Yeah.
That didn't have ocean plates yet, just all continental plates.
Yeah.
Because these Devonian deposits, guess where they are? They're on a continental plate in an outcrop. So all Devonian oceans were on continental crust. That's mind-boggling, right?
Yes. So
I
mean, that tells you something right there about expanding Earth. So
right, if all the oceans earlier than 200 million years ago were on continents, then that's where all the oceans were.
Yeah. It's pretty simple.
I should write a paper about that.
I mean, it's kind of funny because you can imagine writing the paper and you have to like lay it out in the simplest of terms, like almost like you're speaking to a kindergartner. It's hilarious.
That's how you got to do it. So the earliest tropical fossils in the Arctic, the most recent we can find are not from 12,000 years ago in a pole shift. They're from 360 million years ago. There's nothing more recent than that that's tropical.
Right.
Now, there are some forests that are currently buried in ice. They're about 1,500 years old. You know why that is?
I think that's
because it was
obvious.
Warmer in the Arctic 1,500 years ago, which people don't get. They think we're all going to die if it gets warmer. The reason the Roman Empire flourished is because it was warmer than it is today.
It's called the Roman warm period.
Noah doesn't acknowledge that. They erased it.
Really?
Yeah, it is. They claim it's warmer now than the Roman warm.
Wow.
That's the state of science. So let's go to Antarctica, see if we can get any more earlier data. And we can't. The data from Antarctica shows that it was completely ice covered 14 million years ago. It's very interesting data. They can trace it. So the Antarctica is referred to as West Antarctica and East Antarctica. East Antarctica is the major giant thing that we call Antarctica, where West Antarctica is those weird series of islands that veer up towards South America.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the furthest temperate zone in Antarctica you can get.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually, if you start on that tip, that's where the last trees were 14 million years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can travel south and they get older and older.
Mm-hmm.
So it shows that Antarctic ice slowly growing over millions of years and crushing everything until 14 million years ago, it was like it is today.
Mm-hmm.
And here's another thing. We have continuous Arctic ice for millions of years and Antarctic ice for similar time frames. And none of the ice shows a catastrophic saltwater horizon from when the giant tsunamis washed over these continents.
Yeah.
It would be there. We've had thousands of scientists since the 1980s look at the ice core data, thousands of students going over it millimeter by millimeter, doing gas chromatography, mass spectroscopy, looking for everything and anything. And they would have seen a layer of salt and been like, wow, what is this?
Right.
And that, in fact, exists nowhere in the record.
That's a very good point.
I do digress. So here's something interesting from the paper. The Antarctic surprises keep coming. In October, a Brazilian research team announced they found 75 million year old pieces of charcoal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is on James Ross Island, which is the furthest you can get away from the South Pole, towards South America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it showed that there were forest fires on Antarctica 75 million years ago, but not earlier. So this is pushing, it's very old. Antarctica was ice-free a very long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
It hasn't burned for 75 million years.
Yeah.
And so the facts are that the Arctic and Antarctica. Here, let's talk about the ancient fossils here. I think.
I think I looked at this yesterday.
Yeah, and this is the coniferous trees that they found.
Yeah. I don't remember if it's this or something else I was reading was also talking about a clearly warm period about 55 million years ago in Antarctica.
Yep, scientists knew that 55 million years ago, Antarctica was ice-free and forested.
Yeah.
That's the statement here. But their conclusion from when it was completely covered in ice is 12 million years ago. That's still a very long time for Antarctica to be down there.
Yeah.
And did you hear what I just said there?
Down there. Yeah.
Yeah, because it wasn't down there. And that brings us to the expanding Earth idea and how ridiculous plate tectonics is. I want you to look at Pangea on the top right here, 200 million years ago. This is the speculated paleogeographic location of the plates.
Mm-hmm.
You notice something a little weird. 2/3 of the Earth is a giant ocean that there is no geologic evidence for.
Mm-hmm.
None of that exists anywhere we can find.
There's no oceanic plate.
And yet we have rocks as old as 3 billion years old we can find, but we can't find any of this ocean.
Yes. That's a problem.
I mean, come on.
I mean, it's really funny because it's kind of like what I said earlier about having to explain it like you're talking to a kindergartner, because the evidence is actually pretty simple. But it requires people to make the leap to this idea of that Earth was much smaller at one time, which I understand, given all of the narratives that we've all been fed since we were school children, is a little hard to swallow, but there's really no other conclusion for the lack of oceanic plates and crust in that time frame.
Ocean crust, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, here's another thing. If we've got any high-level mathematicians or physicists that know anything about spin theory, as far as it's very, I can't even attempt any of that kind of math.
Are you talking about, what do you mean by spin theory?
Like advanced calculus that they could use to determine if all the crust was on one side of the Earth, would we wobble out of orbit?
Oh, because the spin theory I think usually refers to like at the atomic level, but this is just basic Newtonian physics.
Centrifugal force and mass.
Yeah, basic
and all
Newtonian physics, basically.
Yeah. So I don't think that that's even probable that we could stack all these on one side of the Earth without something happening.
Right.
Oh, that brings us to the break. And when we come back, we'll talk about some of those crazy theories of cataclysmic pole shift.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. And we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine.
There was blood on the wire.
Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West.
There are lives in the balance. People under fire. Children at the cannons.
Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Ruhe Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Very amusing. You're always amused.
Well, you're cheering for yourself right along with the fake audience, so it's funny.
So if you're listening out there, did we convince you that the catastrophic Earth tilt probably doesn't happen? I mean, I think you could just logically think about it, that there are no, mass extinctions happening at regular intervals that kill everything on Earth. And then how do we repopulate the Earth if everything dies?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be.
I mean, it's not that we don't have mass extinctions, but
oh yeah, we do.
right, but not at the kind of interval that's being
And
suggested.
there's
not for the reason that
there's not catastrophes. The last mass extinction was 12,900 years ago.
yeah.
When we got bombarded by cometary debris, it broke the ice sheet. It created the Carolina Bays. Tsunamis swashed back and forth across the Atlantic, probably washing over the entire African continent. There's evidence for that.
Mhm.
But not the earth tilting.
Mhm.
Now, what there is, geologically speaking, we have evidence for true polar wander.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is look at Hawaii and then an ocean map, and you can see that the island has been moving.
Mhm.
And that is the true polar wander. It's a slow process that's either plate tectonics or the crust slowly slipping.
Mhm.
And the work of Mario Buildreps shows the North Pole has slowly moved. It was once in Greenland, and now it's where it is. So it's moved like a considerable amount, 15 degrees or more,
Mhm.
but that's over a long period of time.
Mhm.
And it
Right, it's not
also
a-
might have to do with this expanding Earth.
Yeah.
While it expands, it could also slide a little.
Yeah, I'm thinking that so we've talked several times about that orange peel effect, right? So if here's, well, obviously audio listens can't hear this, but you've got everything sort of expanding from the South Pole out. And you can imagine that maybe that doesn't happen in a completely even fashion, right? Like maybe one side of the Earth is moving out faster than the other, and so that could explain some of the I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for there, but
The true polar wander could be because of differential expansion.
yes, thank you. That's
Yeah.
a great way of putting it. Yeah.
So there are catastrophes happening on Earth. There is a true polar wander. In fact, geologically speaking, they found a time around 83 million years ago where the pole might have moved as much as 12 degrees in a short period of time.
Wow. How was
Have
that
you ever-
determined?
Let me share the screen up and we'll bring some of that data in. First thing, before we get to the 83 million year old polar slip that may have occurred, pole slip, I was looking at this graph here, which is basically the temperature on Earth graph that I had up earlier, overlain with the biology. And it's curious to me that Homo sapiens or hominids emerge as soon as the Earth goes into ice age.
That is very interesting.
And we get the smartest when it's the coldest Earth has ever been. This is when the megalithic builders were building Machu Picchu and the pyramids.
Huh.
And then they all got wiped away here when it got warm at 12.9.
Yeah. The on this graph, at the end of the graph with the picture of industrialization and then the very exaggerated upward curve of the temperature is very funny.
Yeah, because it's a lie. These are projections.
It's like the
you see how
hockey
they have
stick data.
multiple ones? The green is
Yes.
the actual. Yeah.
What red is predicted?
That's
can't
got to
see
be
that.
IPCC numbers, I bet.
Yeah. It's like the hockey
One of
stick
them's
data.
Michael Mann.
Yeah.
And again, when Homo sapiens sapien took over Earth, was right here after this really cold dip, and then the Neanderthals went extinct and we became king. It's weird that the cold has something to do with humanity.
I mean, that's also very interesting because there is information to suggest the opposite, right? Like we talk about the Roman warm period and that this was a huge flowering of civilization in that part of the world. So interesting.
Well, these are evolutionary leaps. These are not So I think these are evolutionary leaps prior to the rise of the civilization. So what's happening on these cold periods is cosmic rays coming in like a grand solar minimum. The sun shuts down, the magnetosphere is weak, and we all evolve.
Right.
Now, there's evidence to support this. When the last cold period was the Maunder minimum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had something occur then, which made us brilliant humans, the Renaissance.
Yeah.
And we're making Stradivarius violins in 1500. How did that occur? People had more time and they were indoors, they said. I believe there was a cosmic effect that enlightened people, the Enlightenment, that people started writing fantastic symphonies and all kinds of crazy things happened during the Renaissance.
I can imagine this happening in two ways, right? Like one sort of being in the way that you're talking about, like cosmic in the sense that perhaps periods of time where cosmic rays are high, we have more access to let's call it like cosmic spiritual information, right? Like our crown chakras and our third eye chakras are opening because of the cosmic rays. But also I can see it from the perspective of um, we enter a cold period and there are fewer humans surviving, and then if cosmic rays have an actual effect on our DNA causing mutation with a smaller population, it's going to be easier for that mutation to take hold for those
So
that
they
survive.
spread smartness.
Yeah well let's hope that the mutation goes in the direction of intelligence. Right, it might not, but
So that's an interesting side note about humanity there.
yeah.
Now, this is interesting. I was just Googling, did the Earth tilt? Does the Earth tilt? And I found this article here. It's coming from a creation magazine.
Mm.
And even they say no, because they looked into the science. That's how hilarious this is. But they do mention Earth's axis may have tilted 12 degrees in the late Cretaceous.
Mm.
That interesting?
Mm. Yes.
Now, did the Earth tip on its side 84 million years ago? No, 12 degrees isn't on its side, but it would explain Mario Bildrep's shift in the rotational pole, about 12 degrees.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they did it. See here, this sequence of sampling here on the road cut. They did those cores.
Yeah.
And let me show you the data. Yeah. So right around here, the latitude of Italy, this is like a true polar wander. See how it just goes back and forth?
Mm-hmm.
That may have to do with like the precession, but we know the Earth tilts and maybe wobbles in a long time frame. 10,000, 12,000. The precession of the equinoxes would be the frame. 12,800, whatever number they're assigning it now.
Right.
But they see a quick shift in the latitude of this place in Italy over a short period of time. And this may be right here, this part of the graph may be an Earth expansion period of 2 million years. It's like 1 million. From 79 to 80 million years ago, the Earth may have expanded and this latitude may have shifted 12 degrees. That would be a significant expansion period.
Yeah, well, and the other thing that's interesting about this, because, going back to the idea that it has something to do with precession of the equinoxes, I mean, obviously, based on this time scale, it doesn't fit, right? Like, if you were going to say that each one of those shifts corresponds to, like, the wobble of the axis.
No, it has to be something else.
Yeah.
Because there's only one event we've ever found that did this 84 million years ago. So we'll leave you. There'll be links to everything we talk about, all the papers below the video when you watch it on the replay tonight over at Magnetic Reversal News.
About 8 p.m. Mountain Time, which is, 10 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, and we'll be in the chat. We usually are. And also support Revolution Radio, #1 listener-supported radio. They don't have any sponsors. And one other thing before we forget, save the date, September 16th and 17th is the 34th annual Crestone Energy Fair. Reimagine Self, Village, and Nature. And Lee and I will be speaking and vending there. So come check it out. It's an awesome event. And it's going to be much later than usual, happening in September rather than the last week of August. All right, so let's get into the meat of the problem. It's interesting when you look into anything about the cataclysmic pole shift hypothesis that they immediately use words like pseudo-scientific. There's good reason for that. We just went over the known science. And so if you disregard that for your own means or ends or laziness, that's not our fault. That's your fault. And so the cataclysmic pole shift hypothesis is a pseudo-scientific claim that there have been recent geologically rapid shifts in the axis of rotation of Earth, causing calamities such as floods and tectonic events. Now, that's a ridiculous explanation on face value, because if there was a rapid pole shift, that's not all that would happen. And that is the least of our worries. Floods, the ocean would be displaced. And literally, flood is not the word.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so it does say here there is evidence precession has changes in axial tilt, but that changes on a large time scale. Research shows that during the last 200 million years, true polar wander of 30 degrees has occurred. Now, that is completely plausible, and they picked 200 million years for a good reason. Do you know why?
No, I don't.
From our last talk, that's when the oceans formed. The Atlantic.
Oh. Yeah.
So that could be the beginning of Earth's expansion.
Wow.
And if we have to expand twice the size in 200 million years, that's going to shift all the plates quite considerably.
Yeah.
In fact, Antarctica has to go from the equator to the South Pole. That's a 45-degree shift.
Yeah.
But all these things are moving at different rates because of that orange peel effect you were referring to.
Yeah. Yes.
And there's evidence the Arctic has been very cold and up there for a very long time, much longer than Antarctica.
Mm-hmm.
Antarctica is only recently frozen 14 million years ago, when Antarctica or the Arctic has been frozen for a very long time.
Yeah.
The crocodiles in the Arctic were 90 million years ago.
Yeah.
So Antarctica, and if it is the orange peel effect and the Arctic has been up near the Arctic, that would make sense, because if the orange peel is opening south and Antarctica is moving down into the South Pole, and the oceans are forming.
It's like it's almost like the Arctic is like the navel, and everything sort of grows out from that. And so it makes sense that the Arctic would be largely in the same place.
Yeah, and it's stuck down there. It keeps getting further away from everyone.
What, Antarctica?
Yeah, because the Mario Build Reps shows the mid-ocean ridge it's a circle around Antarctica.
Yeah, yeah.
And the other guy?
That in of itself is amazing, right? Because it shows the mid-Atlantic ridge is basically like a seam.
Mark Carlotto. Yeah, we got to get him back on.
Yeah.
He's the guy that wrote the textbook, Expanding Earth, right?
I think so.
Yeah, that was a great show. So the Earth's pole has moved. Probably not catastrophically.
Yeah.
There's geologic evidence to suggest that it may have rapidly moved up to 12 degrees 84 million years ago. But overall, true polar wander has been 30 degrees since the oceans opened up. That's an interesting thought. And what I mean by that, if you haven't watched our Expanding Earth show or don't even know what we're talking about, if you reverse the mid-ocean ridges and you do it backwards, all the continents come together in a tiny sphere. They don't come together on one side of the Earth with a giant ocean on the other side. It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Well, and then there's additional evidence that shows that they had to meet as a sphere, right? Because some continents, if you look at the taxonomy, you have matching taxonomy.
I have it right here. Look at the map. Look at this.
Yeah. So I don't specifically remember at this moment, but like, for example, you could be talking about taxonomy in this image of, I don't even know which grouping of continents this is called, but on the eastern boundary.
Well, this is actually the lower portion of Pangea is called Gondwanaland.
Gondwanaland. There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if you were looking at the eastern boundary of Australia, which is all the way at the eastern edge of this continental grouping, you would find similar taxonomy at the western edge of South America, which is at the other side of this grouping. So how did that happen? If they weren't, they have to be connected on that information.
Yeah, it's they used the fossil Glossopteris, which is found in Australia here. And it's also found over here in South America.
Right.
But in this picture, they're not touching because they have this gigantic ocean.
Right. Right. Well, and then of course also we have to mention, just for the basics of Expanding Earth too, when we talked about this earlier, is that there is no oceanic plate that is older than, I don't remember what the number is. What is the?
It's changed over time, but it's around 200 million years old.
Yeah.
There's a small section that may date as old as 280, but it's a very tiny wedge, and that might have been the beginning of the expansion.
Yeah. So where is the old oceanic plate if we've always been the same size? Like, where is it? It was clearly non-existent.
It all had to be subducted in 200 million years, every single inch.
Right. And at the same time, there is no evidence for a rate of subduction that can match the rate of the mid-Atlantic ridge, for example, spreading. It's just the math does not add up.
As it's spreading now, as hypothetical, there could be periods where it speeds up.
Yeah.
Because we're always stuck in that uniformitarianism mindset. Everything has to be exactly as it is now. So when even
though the evidence says the contrary, it clearly says to the contrary. Just on that issue of subduction and expansion at the ridges, it's crazy.
The only way I would believe plate tectonic theory and the idea of a supercontinent like Pangea or Gondwana is if someone found me a 500 million year old ocean crust.
Right. I mean, you could argue that Pangea is real, except that it's not Pangea as it is typically portrayed, right? Pangea would have to be an entire globe of continental crust. So it's not just a continent, it's the whole planet.
Yeah, Pangea was the small Earth that was all crust.
Right.
That's what should be in textbooks.
Yes.
How long do you think that happens?
I had no exposure to expanding Earth theory until, sometime in, let's say, the past year. And once I look at the evidence, it sounds preposterous on its face because of what you've learned. But once you look at the evidence, it's very clear that is what had to have happened. I really can't see another explanation for the evidence that exists.
Yeah, there's just so much of this ocean crust that needs to be here on Earth at a very recent time frame. 120 million years ago, it's still there.
Mm-hmm.
And in that time frame, we subducted every bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
If you just look at the globe here, do you know how many miles, if we go around the backside from one end to the other of Gondwana land, that is? That's thousands of miles of crust needs to all be subducted. It's insane at face value.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So where do we go from here?
Well, one thing that I think maybe is missing from our conversation here is when we talk about the Arctic basically being like this paper, which I guess will be in the description box. This is about cuspid forests in the early late Devonian paleo-equatorial zone of Svalbard. So if we're going with expanding Earth through this orange peel effect, where the North Pole is essentially the navel where expansion happens, well, then how did this area get to be so warm? Talking about it being essentially equatorial in climate.
How did it get so warm?
Yeah.
It was extremely warm. Let's bring it up. It's extremely warm a while ago. Look at
so
it.
We're just talking about the temperature of all of Earth.
Literally 25 degrees warmer on Earth.
Yeah.
50 million years ago.
Yeah.
And then during the Devonian and Silurian, we have these extreme warms in the Silurian.
Right.
And then the Permian. In the Permian, the whole Earth is supposed to be covered in this gigantic jungle with 8-foot dragonflies and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what else is funny too? So if we're talking about this particular paper about the clay cuspid forests in Svalbard, right? This is data to about 380 million years ago. So late Devonian, and we have this big spike. And then the other thing that's
380. Let's look at it on the graph. 380 is right about here.
Right.
Which is plus 6 degrees C above today.
Right. And so the other thing that's kind of interesting to me is that this is linked to a time period also where we have huge amounts of vegetation sort of exploding on Earth. And as a result, carbon dioxide levels dropping because all of that plant life is going to be consuming the carbon dioxide.
Yes.
So if you, then you look at the temperature graph, and the temperature is falling dramatically. Now, I mean, we know that there is, there's not a carbon dioxide. If you look at a graph of temperature and carbon dioxide together, temperature leads carbon dioxide and not the other way around. So,
Yes.
so
Correct.
that's, yeah. So, I mean, you do kind of see them correspond to each other. But so the question is, clearly, at least from what we understand, it's not the carbon dioxide that's changing the temperature. It's the temperature that's changing the carbon dioxide level. So what's actually changing the temperature is the question.
Right. And in the case of the Devonian spike here in temperature, and then the temperature drops 12 to 14 degrees C.
Over like 100 million years, but
yeah, about 50 million.
To get to the bottom.
50 million, it drops precipitously and rises again. What is causing that? So, and the logical thing is the sun.
Yeah.
So our sun is probably highly variable, controlled externally and made of liquid metallic hydrogen. But that is a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But our sun is controlled from an external source that's like a dynamo. And we know there's a dynamo. I had Valentina Zarkova on multiple times just last week, and all she talks about is the sun's dynamo. So it's literally has a dynamo, but we don't have the wherewithal to look at it on these timescales. We've only been looking at it at short time frames. So maybe it does power up and down every 12,600 years. Maybe maybe the Yuga cycle doesn't have to do anything with the precession of the equinoxes. It has to do with something coming from our sun.
That's what I would agree with that.
And because energy is vibrational, everything is vibrating. So, and it may have some connection with these cold periods and the Enlightenment. It's, I think, all connected, and we're missing the big picture because we just don't have a big enough data set.
Yeah. Well, and then it's hard to look at, like, so for example, on this particular graph where we have wildly varying stretches of time represented by the same, length on our graph here. So it's impossible to see any patterns in this. And then we have that additional problem of data resolution, where we have much more data, higher resolution, the more recent it is. And the further back we go, we're really lacking a lot of info.
Well, if you look at the smooth curve here in the hundreds of millions, it's pretty regular. And this corresponds to the work of Liv Shaviv or Shamir. I don't know I forget his name, but he's out of the University of Israel. And he concluded these are massive cosmic ray spikes in here. And what's happening is that our solar system is moving at around the Milky Way galaxy. These spikes correspond to the spiral arms. So we're moving into these material-rich arms and then these voids on a periodicity of about 60 million years.
Yeah.
And he's also linking that to the mass extinction cycle.
Yeah.
So what happens when we go into these material-rich arms? We get bombarded.
With cosmic rays.
This show has proven the Earth gets bombarded in times of quiescence, which is now. We are still getting hit by so many objects.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if we went into a field of debris? It would be like a Star Wars movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is a little bit more off topic, but this sort of fits into what we talked about last week in terms of genetic material actually coming from space. So go back and check that out if you haven't listened to that from last week. But if we're going into one of these dense areas of the spiral arms of the Milky Way,
yes,
that would suggest we would be getting a lot more genetic material coming in certain periods in times of high cosmic rays.
And so during Noah's Ark, when all the genetic material is coming in, the catastrophe also happens. Which is why there is no evolution, so to speak, because what we have on these mass extinction boundaries is the end of thousands of species, and right on the other side, all new species. Where did they come from? They came from space. And this is in the form of potentially viruses and other material, new, I'm missing the great word for that, but there's a good word for that, for new material that comes to Earth that's not here. But this,
are you talking about the panspermia concept?
well, it is panspermia, yes, but I'm thinking of a different word I'm missing.
Hmm.
So during these cosmic catastrophes, these mass extinction events that are occurring as we go through spiral arms and get bombarded by material, the material contains life from other worlds in our solar system. I mean, galaxy. Oh, I got thrown off by the music. So we're all aliens. Once again, we've proven that.
Yes.
That was a boom, wasn't it?
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.